Hey folks, this is a quick video on doing a through-hull mounted transducer. In this case, it's an Airmar SS175HW. This is their high and wide. And when you actually buy these, you need to get them with a tilt to match whatever the dead rise is at the bottom of your hull. So make sure you measure that. They make a 0, a 12, and a 20 degree. In this case, this is an 18 degree hull. So the 20 degree fits within the criteria. If you have questions, look at Airmar's website. They have details as far as what range of degrees would fit within these different categories of transducers. All right, to get started, of course, when you're drilling a large hole like this in your hull, the old adage, measure twice, cut once. Well, I would say measure like 20 times, then cut once. And down in this lower section, this is in front of the motors. It's got twin outboards. I've got a location where I'm going to mount it, which is right there. You see that I have it circled. I had different locations that were perspective locations. So I use a Sharpie and mark these different spots and then get underneath and just confirm where that's going to be with the trailer bunks. You just want a location that's going to be, even though these are rated, these particular transducers are rated for trailer bunks where the weight, they apparently can handle the weight. They're rated for that. That's just not ideal. So you try to still put it in a location that's going to be clear, that will clear the trailer bunks. So that's why I mentioned, measure 10 times, cut once kind of thing. So you see, I have a pilot hole I already drilled. I'll be using a hole saw, but it's easier for me to weld a hole. If for some reason I screwed up on my measurements, a little hole like that is easier to weld than drilling a 4 1/8 inch hole and then having to weld that whole thing up. So that's why I always do a pilot hole. So in this location, it's free of anything that is upstream. So there's no through holes or anything upstream that would create extra water turbulence. So that's the key when doing this. And in this case, it's about 3 feet in front of the outboard motors. Closer to the keel is usually a better bet as far as cleaner water. The best thing to do is to talk to other boaters that have installed these. So, if they had any issues, success, or even issues rather, then you're going to be able to get that from them. So let's kind of talk through this. With stainless steel and aluminum hull, they have bushings. This way you have to go with a bigger hole cut because you need to accommodate this bushing. We don't want dissimilar metals, in this case stainless steel on aluminum, because you'll get some serious corrosion. Even though that we will be bedding this with 4200, which is what Airmar suggests that you use, not 5200. Even though we are bedding it with that, they still want extra isolation because they just don't want a situation where this is ever going to make direct contact with the aluminum hull, because you get these two dissimilar metals and it will eat away at your aluminum hull when it's in water. So you've got this. This actually is going to come down here on the bottom. We'll bed all of this with 4200. Then on the inside, they give you these rubber gaskets. You get a rubber gasket. I'm trying to do this one-handed here with the camera. You got a gasket like that. You've got this spacer. This is a plastic spacer. Then you do this. And then we have our final nut here. And there are a couple of threaded lock screws that go in here to make sure this thing does not come loose. You bed the whole thing with 4200 so that it seals it. There's no issue of leaking. And the 4200 also helps deal with vibration, because that's another thing, is you got a lot of pieces here where you could get some vibration. So the 4200 will deal with that. They also make custom wrenches. So there's a wrench for here. And this here is another wrench. And then there's another one here. I fabricated one. What did I do with it? This is one I've done in years past. I kind of built this out of aluminum. I just cut it out. And that just allows me to grab this and hold it in place. Obviously, I cut that a little wider than it needed to be, but at any rate, this does work. So that's kind of what you need. You can use some large Channel locks, if you can get it to fit in there, but the challenge is in these bilges, a lot of times it's pretty tight. So that's why Airmar, sells these. And this one obviously fits a socket wrench so you can get in there. Okay, so that's pretty much the method of installing these. Again, hole saw requires 4 1/8 of an inch, and that's about it. And then once you get everything bedded with the 4200, you'll want to let that cure. So these perform awesome. These are great, especially the high W or the HW, the high wide. It's a 25-degree cone angle, and these things are amazing for upper water column. So tuna, salmon, anything in the upper water column, they are just phenomenal transducers. Super sensitive, and probably one of the most sensitive ones that Airmar produces in this particular family of transducers. So at any rate, hopefully this helps. Oh, I forgot to also mention there is an arrow pointing to the keel. So just make sure that you line all that up when you go to install this thing. Underneath the boat, again, I write with a Sharpie because you can clean that up later. But you see that there's this little metal sensor. That's the temperature sensor. That lines up with the keel. So just make sure that when you get this positioned underneath the boat, especially if you have a helper, they can help, line this up with you. That needs to point to the keel. Of course, this arrow needs to point to the keel. That's because the elements are mounted in here. They're bedded in this epoxy inside here at an angle to deal with the offset of your dead rise. So that's why you got to make, if you did it this way, for example, pointing the opposite direction, it was mounted in your hull, well, you're going to be shooting sideways for the most part. So make sure you line that up. I'm doing a dry fit. Before we start, 3M 4200 bedding in place. You want to dry fit everything because if, for example, it's too thick here, let me bring this closer. Let me zoom out. You need some threads exposed here. This lock collar or lock nut needs to get down here a couple, or be threaded on at least a few turns, so it's down in the threads. The reason for that is there are lock screws that go in here, and they have to bite into this, and that is so that you don't, it doesn't vibrate loose, right? It keeps these in place. So there's 2 of them. There's they're basically Allen screws that go in here. The general rule of thumb is also put a little bit of thread sealant on those because you don't want those to vibrate loose. The idea is to make sure this baby never, ever comes loose. And if you do it properly and you put all your bedding and your thread sealer and everything, these things, they're not going to go anywhere. They're not going to leak. So you'll notice down here, I use sandpaper to scuff everything. You want to clean it really well. Get the oxide layer off so that your 4200 will bite into this and adhere. You can even wipe it down with acetone. That's not a bad idea. And it's not going to leak. As long as your surfaces are true and flat, you're not going to have any problems. So I know guys freak out about drilling a 4-inch hole in the bottom of their boat, but if you take the proper steps, it's not going to leak. These things are pretty beefy. So this is what we got. It's all tightened up. It's installed. So we're just going to let all this bedding material, this 3M 4200, set up overnight, and we're about ready to go.